Let us begin. I'm going to call to order the Brattleboro Selectboard Special Meeting of Tuesday, August 31st, 2021. And I will note that the Select Board will be participating in this meeting via Zoom, and we encourage the public to likewise participate via Zoom. But there will also be a presence at the Select Board meeting room where everyone will be asked to be socially distant and masked. So anyone can join this meeting via Zoom. The agenda with the link is on the town website. And so the meeting has been convened. And Peter, please confirm that the meeting has been officially warned.
Yes, it has.
Thank you very much. All right, now this is a special meeting solely to update the town regarding the implementation of the community safety report. And therefore, I will begin by handing over the baton to Peter Elwell for his presentation. Thank you, Peter.
Thank you, Liz, and good evening, everyone. I'll try to keep my presentation relatively short, but it's obviously a matter of great importance to the community and to town government. And there's a lot of pieces to it and a lot of work that has been going on around various aspects of this. So I do want to take a few minutes here at the beginning to summarize the written update that was put on the town's website last Friday and distributed to the select board and to some people in the community who had had a particular role in this and or shown some particular interest in this. But it was been available to everyone in the public since Friday afternoon on the town's website. For that reason, I'm not going to read it or go through every explicit detail that's in it, but I do think it's important to summarize it, and that'll take a few minutes. Just to sort of set the stage for that, to remind everyone, it was a year ago right now that the select board was in the process of creating the community safety review team, which was comprised of 2 facilitators and 9 members of a committee of town residents, and a couple of folks, I think at least one, and I think a couple that were not Brattleboro residents, but had been involved in community safety related issues here in Brattleboro, and so were selected to serve in that capacity. That was the result of the series of meetings through the summer of 2020 with very extensive community input around issues of community safety and the request that the board conduct such a review or empower some citizens, some residents to conduct such a review. And so by the end of September, the community safety review team had been appointed by the select board. And from October through the end of the year, they met weekly, sometimes more often than that, collected a lot of information from the public, and issued a report as requested by them. And when you created this back in September of 2020, you asked that the group report back to you and the community at the end of the year by December 31st. And in fact, on New Year's Eve, the report was finished and sent to the town. Through January and part of February, you, the select board, held a series of meetings to receive additional public input on the report that was then, out in the community and being reviewed. And that culminated in a March 2nd select board meeting at which the select board directed that we move forward in the manner that we're going to be discussing tonight. I provided to you some background information and the first iteration of the spreadsheet that we're also going to work from a bit tonight that gave some notes on the 41 separate recommendations that had been included within the community safety report, so that there was some context for ways in which, for instance, certain of them couldn't be implemented because of particular aspects of Vermont law or other legal barriers. There was just a little bit of that. There were quite a few more where we thought it would be helpful to have some context about what was and was not within, what is and is not within the town's control. So we provided some information in the spreadsheet around that. We refer to this as the implementation table for the 41 recommendations. and some other information related to these different aspects of the work. And so I asked you that evening to authorize that we proceed with the body of work, and knowing that some of this would get done, addressed, and finished quite quickly. Other aspects of this we wouldn't even begin for a while. There'd be a lot in the in-between category of things that we would start to work on, but based on the need to include people in the community and experts from away, and give good full consideration to actions that are potential actions the town might take in this body of work, that there would be quite a lot of it that would be ongoing for an extended period of time. But we needed to get started, and I asked you to please not try to differentiate on the front end of that work between what might move forward quickly and what might take more time, because it represents such a vast body of work. Thought it was important that we just get started and find our way, and that in some ways collaboration with others might accelerate or slow down some of the things that we had as sort of our town government first impressions, and in fact some of that has proved to be true. So you did authorize that. I appreciate that, on March 2nd, and we've been working since then to move forward. I'll go through now and summarize what I think are some of the most important things that have happened over the course of the last 6 months, almost all of which does flow from the report. I will say some of it, and it's going to stand out quite obviously here in just a moment, it relates to actions and ways in which we are approaching our work that have been impacted by the community safety review process, but don't explicitly relate to any one of the 41 recommendations that came forward in that report. And so to give a specific example of that and get moving with the substance of the meeting, there was a very important aspect of this in the report and recommendations that we received. The first 4 recommendations of the 41 relate to this very important aspect that asked us to pause, to acknowledge that systemic racism is real, that there are other forms of systemic oppression that occur, and that we as government officials are involved in systems that have been created by systemic oppression and that are sustained by systemic oppression, and asked us to make a commitment that we would work to identify where that exists in Brattleboro and commit ourselves to correcting it. Obviously it's not a toggle switch one throws, but to being committed to the hard, long, critically important work of correcting it, identify it, and work on it together with the community, so that we can look back on this work and believe that we have actually not just accomplished tasks that are worthwhile, but changed the systems in a way that makes them more fair and more equitable. So we committed to that. I read an acknowledgement and a commitment that evening that you embraced that evening back on March 2nd. And the work that we've been doing since then, both inside of these 41 recommendations and outside of these 41 recommendations, and in fact, beyond just the scope of community safety related work, but in other aspects of town government, we've seen that commitment be real. We've seen it be present in the work that we're doing in ways that those of us doing the work often remind one another. Let's remember about equity and about correcting systemic barriers to equity where we see them. And so just a couple of quick examples so that it's more than just my saying so. In outreach to the community was an area where both inside this community safety process and in the report recommendations and in other ways in which the community has communicated with town government over the last couple of years, we've had it called out to us that we have not over the years done sufficient outreach to parts of the community that have been traditionally underrepresented in town government. We agree that that's true. We've committed to correct it. And there are in specifically 2 separate processes. I think there's actually quite a lot of other ways in which this is showing up in more nuanced fashion in the work that we're doing together with community partners, but very specifically related to housing. We have the housing study that's ongoing, and the work around, we were asked by representative town meeting explicitly to have an inclusive process to create the request for proposals, to hire the consultant who will help us with upgrading the town's website and creating a more robust level of public engagement in the work that the town does. So in that project, right from the beginning of how we're hiring the professional help, the intention is to make sure that we are doing better outreach and being more inclusive. And in fact, both of those things are underway, including not just reaching out deeper into the community than we often have in the past, but also following the advice of the community safety review team and others, compensating individuals who are participating in those processes. So those are examples of how that has shown up specifically out in the community so far. We also, in the manner in which we have addressed in the last 6 months the ongoing challenges of people experiencing homelessness in Brattleboro, we have worked consciously as a team. When I say a team, I'm talking primarily about town government, interdepartmentally, but also in our work together with Groundworks Collaborative and others in the community outside of town government, worked hard to reduce the role of the police department in addressing situations that arise in the community with people who are experiencing homelessness. So we're applying our partnerships and applying our civilian members of the town team to those situations in ways that have allowed us to not expect that the first go-to in each situation where we need to go out and address some kind of whether it's a person who's taking up residence on private property and the private property is asking that they be private property owner is asking that they be removed, or whether it's a more public situation and impacts to the community. We're attempting to handle those in a person-to-person way that doesn't involve a police officer unless it really has to. There have been some circumstances where it really did have to, but we're trying to apply those lessons to that work. And finally, something that had begun but has been substantially reinforced. It began before the community safety review process, but has been substantially reinforced by the recommendations that came out of that process back last December. Is how we do recruitment for town positions. And in this, I'm talking about everything from entry-level positions in any of the operating departments up through and including the current recruitment for the next town manager and the recruitment that we have done for various department head positions this year. We are no longer specific about any particular educational requirement or any particular number of years that someone has to have had in a particular kind of job. We speak in our position advertisements and our job descriptions to the work that is done by the particular position involved in any given search and the kinds of characteristics we're looking for so that anyone on the planet who feels that they meet that description and can do that job has the opportunity to apply and present themselves to us. We're finding this is creating larger and deeper applicant pools. We are getting more diverse applicant pools, and we are finding that some of our best candidates are coming on non-traditional paths. This has been a particularly rewarding part in terms of the positive impact to town government operations, particularly rewarding part of applying a greater awareness of issues of equity, specifically to the work that we're doing. Another area where we have moved forward with something that's very important now and will continue to be important for years to come in positively impacting community safety in Brattleboro, but is beyond the scope of the community safety review team's report, is the hiring of Police Chief Norma Hardy. Norma's in the meeting tonight. She'll be available if we'd like to hear from her. If there are questions that she's best suited to answer, I would ask on her behalf and our collective behalf that we be patient. We're so grateful that she's here and she's been police chief for 32 days. So we want to make sure that Norma gets an opportunity to continue to get a full handle on what she sees here in Brattleboro and the role of the police department in some of these various issues before asking her to weigh in too deeply. I want to just make sure that we're cautious about that this evening. But the presence of Chief Norma Hardy and her almost 30 years of experience, not just in law enforcement, but in very high-ranking, responsible positions of law enforcement within the Port Authority Police Department, bringing to us not just great leadership skills from that career that she had so successfully done in New York and New Jersey, but also in a way that I believe people, as they are starting to get to know Chief Hardy, are seeing, even though it may come as some surprise, it's a bit counterintuitive, but based on the facilities that the Port Authority of New York and New Jersey is responsible for, there's actually quite a lot of similar characteristics in the way in which she, in her work there, interacted with various parts of the population that was served by those facilities, various different characteristics of folks who were, having great needs and experiencing life in a really vulnerable way versus those who are passing through those facilities and looking to travel to someplace. One way or another, the work of the police department in the Port Authority Police Department actually does interact with people on that scale in ways that are very applicable here in Brattleboro. We're finding that to be one aspect of the value that Norma has brought to our community that's even greater than what we had expected. So I would say that, and the other thing I want to just highlight about the way in which she has arrived and engaged with the community. I've been through this in some detail in the written work, but I want to thank Chief Hardy and also assure anyone in the community who hasn't quite yet had the opportunity to meet her and talk with her. She's everywhere. She's been holding, announced sessions where the public is invited to come and spend time with her and talk about community issues and safety issues and police issues, as well as in unannounced situations, walking in downtown, walking in neighborhoods, sometimes alone, sometimes with police officers, other police officers. And as recently, an incident this past weekend, went out on Saturday morning to sort of check on a situation where she then stayed for 2 hours standing on a street corner and just talking to everybody who came by, about what had happened there in an incident overnight, as well as anything else that they might want to chat with her about. So Chief Hardy is an approachable person. She's an engaging person. She's a person who, while she brings this really strong leadership presence, also is somebody who I think just about anybody can find comfortable to talk with. I urge folks to give her that space to keep talking with all of us and learning more about Brattleboro, and engage with her as you get the opportunity. And I'll just say very briefly before moving on, because I don't think it needs all to be reiterated from what I had said before about recruitment, but we did apply to the recruitment process for the police chief. In the hiring process, we applied all of those lessons that we've learned, that we've been applying more generally to our recruitment, as well as specific mention in the materials that all of the applicants looked at before they decided to apply to be our police chief, specific reference to the community safety review process and the ongoing process of implementation that we're talking about tonight. So that was present in that work in order to make sure that whoever we hired as chief would be coming in, presenting themselves to us in a way that we could see how they would add value to this process once they became part of our team. In the 41 recommendations, there are several that spoke specifically, 7 in fact of the 41 spoke specifically to parts of the fair and impartial policing policy that affect the relationship between municipal police departments and the federal immigration authorities. The purpose of including these various aspects of what's referred to as no mas polymigra being the merging of police and migration policing, the 2 different types of law enforcement. No more merging of that is the movement that is asking that police departments across the country adopt these policies. I'm happy to say that within the town of Brattleboro, and within the Brattleboro Police Department, the concept of no mas pala migra was already present, and much of the content of our fair and impartial policing policy already reflected that. But it didn't do that in ways that had that phrased the firewall that we intend to have between immigration enforcement and municipal policing in exactly the way that was recommended by the folks who are recommending this model policy of no mas pala migra. And so we recognize that. We recognize, in fact, there was a difference in the wording, but really a shared commitment in principle. And it made this, and we talked about this back in March, it has come true since then. It made the 7 recommendations related to no mas pala migra some of the easiest, probably the easiest, maybe the only easy portion of this work to implement, because so much of the rest of it is complicated and involves the working together as a community with lots of different points of view and areas of experience, lived experience and professional experience, and wrestling with what's the best way forward. How can we set up improved systems? And what will it take? Who will be doing that? And where does the money come from? And so on. Much of this work is going to be harder and longer and a heavier lift. But the no mas pala migra piece was a matter of collaborating with people from the organization Migrant Justice and 3 local folks who are working on these issues together with the organization Migrant Justice to look at the language they were proposing, how it related to the town's existing policies, and see what changes were necessary. We had a few different sessions, some very good exchange on that. Mark Kerrigan, Captain Mark Kerrigan, who was the acting chief of police at the time, sent the resulting document up to the Attorney General's office as required, but the Vermont Attorney General has the authority over approving any such changes in policy. The Attorney General did approve what we have sent there, and it is now incorporated into BPD's policies and procedures in the manner that the community had asked us to, and in the manner that resulted from the collaboration between town staff and the proponents of this change. So while everything else we're talking about this evening is underway in one way or another, or something that we talk about how we might be working on that in the future, these 7 items actually are finished to the degree that anything is ever finished. So the one thing I would say about it is we will, of course, be ongoing with, training and checking to make sure that we're following the policy and so on. And if there are reasons why, as time goes on, circumstances change and this needs to be changed, we'll address that as those needs arise. But for now and for the foreseeable future, this particular area of the work has been addressed. Standing quite in contrast to that is the next section of my memorandum speaks to a few different ways in which we have been learning about better ways to address issues related to mental health and the way in which an individual's struggles with mental health can show up in the community in ways that have drawn in recent years, at least, responses that can be less geared towards the health of the individual and more geared towards controlling the situation. The sad truth is, until we have better ways in place, there will have to be continued responses like that will lean on that side when there is a concern that what is occurring in any particular situation might actually be a situation that could cause harm to the individual and or the individual causing harm to others in the community. And so this is an area where we need to feel a sense of urgency and need to move deliberately so as to make sure that what we move, that we don't just move away from things that are not the desired way of dealing with this, but move to the better ways of dealing with this so as not to leave a void that could end up actually creating additional harm, both for individuals who are struggling and for individuals who are affected by their struggles. And so here, I've been informed by individuals who have lived experience as well as professional experience in this area of the work about quite a variety of ways in which we can do better. We are going to need to further pursue learning about those so that we can see how they might be applied here. And we're going to need to have partners. This is not going to be an area of the work where town government is going to just take an action and solve a problem. It's an area where, much as with other aspects of social service work in our community, places where we rely on civilians as the first go-to and only have the police or other uniformed authorities come in, in a situation that can't safely be handled by civilians. We need to set up those processes around this body of work as well. And that's not going to happen overnight. We have had some really good examples shown to us of even some work that's being done here in Vermont around this. I'm looking forward to learning more about those pieces, particularly because they're happening here within our environment and our law, our legal structure. And in some of this work, there's really good examples elsewhere that may or may not be directly applicable to how we could go about this here in Brattleboro. But as you'll recall from the community safety report and the body of recommendations, a very large emphasis of that work was placed upon this aspect of the work and the ways in which it shows up in our community and isn't currently addressed very well, frankly. We rely to a far too great degree on the police, even for things that have nothing to do with an immediate threat to someone's safety or a criminal act of any kind or a suspected criminal act of any kind, but just to contain a situation that is causing fear. And we know we need to move away from that. We need to, for the sake of everyone involved, the general public, the particular individuals, and even the police themselves that are overburdened with responsibilities that they're not the best people equipped to deal with. There is, I think, a widespread acceptance of that, but to be able to move that needle, we're going to have to work together to develop the better systems to put in place. There is, along that continuum, one that is being explored, has just begun being explored under the leadership of Fire Chief Len Howard, together with other service providers in the area. So there's a really well-established model that doesn't go all the way to, civilian support or peer support for folks who are in these situations, but does de-emphasize the role of the police. And that is the crisis intervention team model. And there's a lot of this going on around the country, including here in Vermont. There are examples we can learn from and apply here. Want to be clear that this is a step along the way towards what we aspire to in the longer run of being able to better differentiate between what needs this kind of intervention versus what might be able to be better addressed by civilians. But in the meantime, these crisis intervention teams go out where there are mental health professionals and medical professionals together with a police officer in a unit that responds to certain kinds of calls, where the police officer is not the first out of the vehicle. And the police officer doesn't get out of the vehicle unless the situation needs a police officer. So there are, the first impression that is made by the arrival of folks in a crisis intervention team is intended to be medical and mental health support from professionals. It is still institutionally driven rather than peer driven or community driven, but it is a way in which we can have the, again, on this continuum and on this sort of long haul of change, have a place that is removed from the first arriving and the heavy emphasis being on the responsibility we place on the police officer, to have the police officer instead be a support function in this crisis intervention team and be able to step out quickly and assist when the situation is in fact dangerous and does need that kind of a response. That's being explored. It just began during August, so we don't really have anything substantively to say about it yet, but I would expect we will have something more substantive to say about it the next time we do a check-in on this, which I'll propose in a few minutes, will be in December. Data collection and analysis was an important part of the work of the community safety review and the way in which we're looking to improve systems coming out of that review. We have been operating at the Brattleboro Police Department for many years using a system called Spillman. It has been the statewide, the basic data collection system for law enforcement, and I think for others as well that are dispatched using this system. It's old and it's not very nimble, and it hasn't met our needs, particularly as we've been challenged to more deeply analyze, collect data in a way that it can be more deeply analyzed for geographical distribution throughout the community, for racial disparities in terms of the types of calls and the types of individuals that we deal with on various types of calls in the community. We know that there's a need to collect the data in a manner that is both more granular and more readily analyzed. And the good news on that is the state of Vermont has recognized that need as well, and is in the process of converting from Spillman to something called Valcor. We are at the front of the line to receive Valcor. It's currently being installed for the Vermont State Police right now. It'll be installed for the Brattleboro Police Department by the end of this year. We expect it to be fully operational by January. So as we move into 2022, we'll be able to use the Valcor system to do that better, deeper work that we pledged to do and want to do, using the collection of better data and then the analysis of that data, both for the benefit of being, the accountability aspect of that was referenced in the community safety review, as well as, frankly, for the basic operations of the police department. This is information that will be helpful. We don't have an endless supply of officers to meet all of the needs of the community that the police department does need to meet. So to make sure that we're deploying in a way that is not only fair and equitable, but also as effective as possible, the switch to the Valcor system is going to be very important. One thing there to note, we'll be talking about this more during the upcoming budget process, but I want to flag it right now. In order to devote the time to do this, earnestly rather than as time permits, we may need to commit resources to it that we're not currently committing. It may not be something that just gets tagged on to somebody's job. We have some ideas and we're going to explore those and incorporate where we land on that into the upcoming budget process. I'm not suggesting it's necessarily going to be a heavy financial lift, but I do think it's probably going to be necessary for us to invest some additional resources in the data collection and analysis work in order to have it really be meaningful. We are helped in that process in terms of that being an investment that we need to make in using the tool, that the tool is actually being provided to us free of charge. So this is not an insignificant transfer from an old existing statewide software system to this new one. And it's being implemented fully. The Valcor, the change from Spillman to Valcor, is being implemented fully at state of Vermont expense. So in any event, we'll be back during the budget process in the next couple of months to talk more about how to make sure that we actually use Valcor to its best impact. I want to talk for just a minute about some communication that Chief Hardy and I have had with Graham Donald. You may remember Graham Donald from one or two of the meetings that the select board held around these community safety issues. He is the retired chief police inspector from Tayside Police in Scotland. He's been advising the Brattleboro Common Sense organization on their safe policing initiative. We've had several different Zoom meetings with, I guess, Inspector Donald, if I'm, that's a too bold move into trying, Daniel's giving me the thumbs up.
I mean, I don't know, but it's in the ballpark.
It's in the ballpark, yeah. I referred to him in my memo as Mr. Donald, and I felt awkward about that, but I wasn't sure of exactly how to refer to him with his title, so I called him Mr. Donald. He's now retired. He's been promoted to resident of his community. But in all seriousness, he's a person with vast experience in law enforcement, more than 30 years of experience in law enforcement, in leadership positions in law enforcement, particularly in the aspect of it in the UK where armed and unarmed patrols meet. So there's a very great degree to which policing in the UK is done unarmed, but there are units that are armed and specially trained so as to be the quick response units that go in when a situation there is deemed to require that kind of police response. And he was actually responsible for years for one of the armed units in his police department. He has a unique perspective to share in terms of both the value of exploring these questions and the relationship between law enforcement and the community, and whether there is potential in settings so different as ours is from the UK in terms of the gun culture and the prevalence of privately owned guns, whether there is the opportunity that there might be some movement over the very long term in that direction. And he's very realistic in his description of the kinds of things that need to be considered about, you know, what makes our two countries different, and where there might be possibility for us to, you know, look at how this might be applied. Those lessons might be applied here. What we have agreed in our communications with him is that Chief Hardy and Mr. Donald, Inspector Donald, are going to continue to maintain a dialogue, that we're finding our communication with him to be very insightful. We also are feeling beyond cautious in the need to move very slowly and very thoughtfully in how the UK model might be applied here. So what I want to make clear about this, and the reason why I've identified it as a highlight, I know there will be people in our community who don't view this as a highlight at all. It doesn't sound like the needle has moved at all. What I would say to those people is the needle hasn't moved in terms of our sort of eager anticipation for any level of disarmament, right? We are still feeling extremely cautious. I would say even some doubtful, but open. We want to learn more. We want to particularly learn more from someone like Graham Donald, who's saying to us, we understand, I understand, he says, I understand why you'd be skeptical. I understand the concerns you have about being in a different culture, in a different environment. And I think there's some things we can continue to explore that might help you find ways to, at least a little at a time, maybe introduce some of this into your community. And our answer to that is we're open to continuing to learn about it. And my answer to it is Chief Hardy will decide. Chief Hardy, as the person who both, you know, practically and operationally and statutorily is responsible for the operation of the Brattleboro Police Department, will decide when and how and if it's proper for us to move in that direction. But in the meantime, we have not shut down that discussion. We haven't said we're just not interested in having any kind of a conversation with Graham Donald or anybody else about situations where there might be unarmed police officers in the course of their duties. We're willing to keep having those conversations. We might learn something there that we find useful. And so I included it on this list because I really want to underscore sincerely to the community, you know, we represent a broad cross-section of folks. There are people who feel frightened by the degree to which, you know, probably feel frightened, I would say, based on what I know to be the perspective of some of the folks in our community, that we would even have this conversation. What are you doing, spending your time talking to Graham Donald? I think it's important that we talk to Graham Donald and learn everything we can from him. And I think it's equally important that we recognize that, you know, with violence that is present in our community and the difference in the culture between our two countries, that, you know, we can't commit to any particular action in this direction. We are committing to keep an open mind and an open dialogue. And I hope that folks can appreciate that as representative of the degree to which we have embraced this work. We talked about it 6 months ago as being a body of work. Some of it would move faster and some of it would move slower, and some of it might get implemented differently than originally envisioned, and some of it might never get implemented at all. And I just want to use this as an example of a place where, you know, while we may remain highly skeptical, we're engaged with it, because we think that the conversation has been at least educational and might lead to good action over the longer haul. And my final point in update from the first 6 months of work is the degree to which I know there is work going on. I don't begin to know all of it. I know some of it. I know some of who's doing it. It's not my place to talk about it in any kind of detail. If there are people in this meeting who are working on this out in the community and want to say something about what they're working on, that's great. If they want to come forward some other time when it's further, that work is further along, that's great too. It's important for us to recognize, as we did back in March, that within this body of work, that the town of Brattleboro can't pull all the levers. The town of Brattleboro needs to be, open and aware and supportive of those things that are being organized by others that are going to be important to increasing community safety and decreasing reliance on the police. But those things, many of those things are going to have to come from the community or be done together with the community as opposed to being governmental programs. And we've had some really great successes in this community around that kind of work being done. I mentioned just one because it's so directly on point with how town government can have a catalytic impact on work that gets organized from the community. And that's the Women's Freedom Center. When it was founded as the Women's Crisis Center decades ago, it was founded by a group of women to provide safe refuge in a very informal way, in people's homes, without an organized staff and without an organized budget. It grew into a very small nonprofit, eventually, today is a larger, thriving, independent entity with multiple locations that they own and operate to provide safe haven for those unfortunate situations when it's needed. The first home that they had as a physical building within which to provide the services was purchased by the town of Brattleboro using state funds. We got a grant and we were the owner of the building. We were actually the owner of the building until just the last few years. So there are ways in which organically developed, community-driven initiatives like that can thrive with the support of town government and without the support of town government. There are certainly many examples of nonprofits that are doing great work in the community and haven't leaned on the town that way. But my point is that there's a real life example of where something that was generated by individuals in the community that created a greater degree of safety in a person-to-person way, outside of the institutions of government or other institutions, was supported by town government at important moments in its development so that it could become as robust and independent as it is today. I think there's going to be more opportunities like that arise out of the work that is beginning right now. There are efforts underway right now among organizations and individuals in the community who are, sometimes collaborators with town government, but are not actually part of town government. I think that's not only a good thing, I think it's going to be an essential part of actually creating greater community safety going forward. As we look to the next few months of work, I've got three topics on that final page, the 5th page of my memorandum. I'll speak to the last one first because I think the other two sort of fit into that. So the last one says, let's hold another one of these meetings in December so that staff can again report out on what's been going on between August and December. And we can have some additional engagement with the select board and the community around what is being done, what still needs to be done going forward. The reason I think December would be an ideal time to do it is twofold. In part, because it'll be during my final weeks as town manager. And I've been really personally deeply involved in this work. I think it'll be helpful to be able to have one more time together where we do this when I am actually still town manager. And we kind of part of the formal process of my handing the baton to the town manager that you're going to hire here shortly. And you'll move on with the work and with additional sessions like this in 2022, as the work goes forward. But I think it's important that we don't let December come and go without one more check-in. And it's an ideal time because we will be well along in our budget process, but still a month from being finished. And so I think it's like the sweet spot, actually. It's the ideal time to look again at these issues and see ways in which the town's FY23 budget needs to reflect, the work that we're doing in this body of work, and some funds the town might need to provide to various aspects of this. That'll be reflected to some degree, for sure, in the budget that I proposed to you on behalf of town staff the first week in November. And then we're going to work together, through November and December on refining that budget. By the time we get to mid-December, the shape of that budget will be pretty clear, but you'll have some unresolved issues. And if you waited to have the next check-in on community safety until sometime in the new year, you're going to be running out of time to incorporate any input from that meeting into your budgetary decisions. If we tried to have it sooner than that, we probably would be too early in the process and not really sort of have the full context within which the decisions will be made. So I think that sometime in the middle 2 weeks of December is going to be the best time to hold the next check-in regarding community safety. And between now and then, two really important things are going to happen. One is the beginning of those budgetary decisions and the select board actually, sort of getting both of your hands on it. You as a collective body having two hands on this and owning some pieces of, we're going to do this and we're not going to do that, or we're going to do more of this and it needs money. So you'll be beginning to make those decisions, those policy directive decisions that you'll be making in the months ahead and in the years ahead. But the first set of those is really going to come onto your plate as we make budget decisions over the next few months. So I think that's an important thing that's going to happen between now and December. And the other, of course, is, we're deep into the recruitment for the new town manager. You'll be holding interviews and making a selection. And we hope that the new town manager will be on board by sometime around the 1st of December, so that there'll be some opportunity for me to have overlap with that person before I retire at the end of the year. And that's another sort of top priority task between now and December that is, while it's not flowing out of the community safety review process, is going to be an essential part of continuing to move forward with this body of work. I'm done. And it was over half an hour. I apologize.
Oh, Peter. Time means nothing in cases like this. I just wanted to thank you. There's so much good, thoughtful work on behalf of not just the select board, but the entire community. And I thank you and all the town staff who participated. I know this is a lot of work, but there are many complex issues, and I see and I hear that they're being addressed in a cooperative manner, as many things in Brattleboro are need to be addressed cooperatively. And I think we can all continue to work with the outline that Peter has prepared for us, and which was, by the way, in early March, unanimously approved by the select board and set Peter on this path. And I think not only then, but now reflects the trust that the community has in Peter and his work. And I would also venture to say that this is something that the community has come together to support this work. And with those remarks, I open commentary up to my fellow select board members. I'm not seeing any little hands.
Well,
Oh, Jess had her hand up first.
Okay, Jessica.
I'm excited because I've never gotten to speak to this as a select board member. It's really quite thrilling. As a community member who participated in the process last year, to see this work make progress. And I just want to say, because I wasn't there at the March 3rd meeting, I'm wholeheartedly behind the acknowledgement of harm and the support for this community safety review process. And I'm just really excited to have Chief Hardy on board and see all the work that that Peter's done so far on this work, on this enormous set of recommendations. I think the one thing that makes me nervous is what you spoke of near the end, Peter, is this idea that where will the leadership come from, and the knowledge and the institutional partnerships and relationships come from once you retire. And to me, that as a select board, I think we really should look at how we support this work and continuing, both by investing in the partners that are doing the work and investing in some sort of leadership structure that can champion this idea of safety in our community. And what you said, I love what you said, like responding to situations that cause fear that aren't necessarily all falling on the police department. I have a lot of questions and other things, but I want to share the space. So
Great. Ian, before you begin, let me just say that what we'll do is hear from select board members and then hear from the public, and then come back to discuss next steps. So Ian, please go ahead.
Yeah. Peter, thank you so much for the presentation. And thank you to town staff and the community members who have all been part of this. You know, it's an interesting opportunity for us to see this, the next phase, you know, having moved from the community safety review process and the accepting of these goals and objectives, and now actually seeing the rubber hit the road on some of these things, and where we're finding it more difficult and where it's not quite as difficult. I think it's very educational for me, and I hope it is for other people as well. I'm finding myself really anxious to get my hands on it for the places where the select board gets to be sort of the driving force on the policy and some of the budgetary issues. So I'm curious if you could speak a little bit to how prepared you think the town will be, or staff will be, for providing the board with the kind of backup material for some of the policy stuff, and maybe budget stuff that we'll need to really be able to make informed decisions when it comes to the budget season.
May I, Liz?
Please.
Thanks. So we expect to be able to provide good guidance on several of these. And I spoke to them. I honestly, at the top of my head, I don't want to start trying to remember. I'll wing it, and it won't end up being clear. But I would say to folks, the updated implementation table has a new right-hand column that has updated notes as of last week. And there's several places in there where we speak to work that we're doing that we expect to lead to discussion in the FY23 budget process. For those who often don't participate in town budget processes, our practice and our intention for this year is that staff brings forward a proposed budget at the first meeting in November. That'll be November 2nd this year. And then every Tuesday, or almost every Tuesday, sometimes, you know, there's one or two off depending on circumstances, but basically every Tuesday for November, December, and January, the select board is meeting around budget issues and other issues. So there's the same usual 2 regular select board meetings each of those months. There are special meetings that are devoted just to budget, and then there's some budgetary discussion on the regular meeting nights. So we're really deep in that budget process for 3 full months. And we as staff are anticipating bringing to you information relevant to this work and to decisions you'll make in that budget right from the start. And we anticipate that in your review of the budget, you'll likely call out additional things that you want us to further explore and bring to you as that budget process evolves, so that by the time you get to the end of January, you know, there will be, I believe, multiple ways in which this body of work is represented in that FY23 budget.
Thank you, Peter.
May I speak,
Sure.
Liz, to something that Jess mentions. It's been important to me and really satisfying for me professionally to be as deeply involved in this as I've been over the last year or so, and particularly over the last 6 months. And it's important for the community and for town government that we not overly invest our sense of, the progress we're making and the progress we can make in any one person. I get why I'm a little overly identified with it right now. I just urge that we move ourselves away from that. That's why I think that my passing on, knowledge and some sense of responsibility and lots of information about who to connect with to my successor is going to be so important. I'm going to be around once I retire. I'm not going anyplace. I'll be around as a resource if people want to, pick my brain about something, make sure we don't lose some of that knowledge I've gained if I fail to pass it on perfectly. But other people are in this already, deep in it. The community started it. And the work that's going on, within the police department and within other parts of town government is essential to what's happening and the potential that we have of doing greater things. So that's not going to go away. It does need good leadership, and you have made it part of your search that you want to find somebody who's committed to providing that leadership and being part of that process. So I have every confidence that just like we found Chief Hardy, by the way that we looked for a police chief, we found the right one. I'm optimistic that you're going to feel that way about the town manager you hire, because you're looking for that town manager in a way that's really intentional around this body of work and some other parts of our work that are especially important to you and to the community.
Thank you, Peter. Other select board members would like to comment at this time? Tim?
Thank you. Well, I'll just say thank you to Peter and all the staff for getting this together. It was a large amount of work, and of course, included and embedded and beyond this was a huge lift with the community being involved in the selection of Chief Hardy that Peter made. I'm pretty excited about possibilities and furthering community dialogue around these issues. I think and I could pick out individual things, but what I'd love to do is just wax philosophical for a second, because it really occurred to me, especially Peter, when you were talking about what the town can do and what the town can't do, it came back to my phrase that I love to use, capital T and little t, capital T being municipal government and our limited powers, limited but important powers, certainly when it comes to the police force. But even there, we're finding it's limited by statute, et cetera, when it comes to the state of Vermont. But the little t, that little t is actually more powerful. We've seen it over and over again in Brattleboro with partnerships between community organizations that never involve the capital T town, or do involve, like the example you gave with the Women's Freedom Center building. I think, to wax philosophical and keep it short, sorry about that, is what was occurring to me is that I think in this process, when we're really considering what do we want our police force to be doing and how to be most efficient with their time and come to those agreed roles that policing is best for our entire community. What roles do they have? I think I'd like to challenge, along the way, challenge the small T town, every single person in our community and even surrounding the community, to think about when they think of calling for police. Because as we all know here, sitting here, all of us, all the faces I'm looking at are very familiar with the fact that the police respond when called, and that's their job. And it's a very basic thing to say, but if we don't remember that, it's easy to lose the thread of that there's some sort of police brain that is guiding their responses. And that's really not what's going on. What's going on is they are available to fill in all of the gaps and those times when people are feeling those feelings of unsafety. So I'm going to throw it out to our community going forward while I'm on the select board. Think about those times when you're going to pick up the phone and call the police. Why are you doing it? You know, is it something you're feeling uncomfortable seeing? Is it a moment where you can go over and talk to your neighbor if you feel safe doing that? Can you start to make a connection with people versus sort of retreating back and calling somebody to solve this problem for you? Because in the end, some of these problems will become our entire town's problem, you know, these challenges, let's say, instead of problems. Anyway, that's me waxing philosophical. Thank you for the great work, and I'm pretty excited to keep moving forward.
Thank you, Tim. Let me just digress for a minute and see what the hand raised on VCTV might mean.
Good evening. R.I.P. Lee Scratch Perry.
Rest in peace.
I don't know. Let's just move on then. Daniel?
Thanks, Liz. Can you hear me okay?
Yes, thank you.
Great, thanks. I'll do the opposite of waxing poetical from Tim then. I missed my opportunity. Let's see. I really appreciate all the work that's gone into this, like everyone else that is in this virtual room today, I'm sure. And, you know, and I share some of Jess's trepidation about what it's going to look like in the months to come to sort of hand over this work. And I also feel that, you know, as one of the people that's involved in the search for the new town manager, it will be important to me at the very least that the person we seek to hire be actively interested and curious in this process. You know, and that person will bring their own lens and history to it as well, I'm sure, just as Peter has. I'm actually kind of excited to look at the list of policy decisions to be made by the select board, and I'm going to name some of them. So it includes things like investing resources in mutual aid support networks, BIPOC run programs, local organizations that provide voluntary support, places for belonging and connection that are decoupled from policing, working collaboratively towards implementation of alternative mental health supports, invested in restorative justice practices, especially at the neighborhood level, looking at models and considering, you know, building models locally for training around de-escalation, holding space, and directly supporting those in distress. I've looked through this document several times, and it's sort of come to me that that is the space in this document where we have some power and will have some say. And there is a lot to do in terms of that building up alternatives to policing and policing-like safety responses. And so I'm here for it. And like, I don't expect us to solve it all between now and the end of the calendar year, or even now and the end of this next budget cycle. But I would really like, when we're in those budget discussions, to have as much information available around what some of these things could look like. I know, speaking to some community partners already, that there are things that they could do with, you know, with some support. You know, I think Peter's reference to the origin of the Freedom Center is important there. And so I'm excited about that, and I'm hopeful and ready to see where we might end up together.
Great, thanks, Daniel. All right, if the select board has finished their initial comments, then let's hear from the public. Shay is number one. Shay, please. Good evening.
I know. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can.
I wouldn't agree to say Shay is number one, generally. I'm just kidding. It's great to see you all. And thank you so much, Peter and all, for your great thoughts. For those of you in the meeting, most of you know, my name is Shay, and I was one of the co-facilitators of the Community Safety Review. and one of the co-authors of the report, a role which I was grateful to hold and I'm grateful to not hold anymore. And I wanted to just share a couple of reflections about what I heard from Peter, and just share some gratitude for all of the labor that you've done. I think it makes a lot of sense that in a year with so much transition, you're focusing on setting up those transitions to carry the work forward. And I think that we advised you at some level, I think, to like hold an awareness about urgency as a characteristic of white supremacy culture, that the need to band-aid fix things quickly as opposed to dig in really deeply. And so I want to preface what I say with that, because I think oftentimes in doing this work, I feel a sense of urgency to get things done. And there's some of that that's appropriate, but I just wanted to share that context. And I want to just say that I think you've heard me say this before in other meetings about this process, that one of the challenges I think of this process that largely was really collaborative and went really well is that it's hard to know specifically for me what the direct commitments that we made together really mean. I think that the safer policing conundrum is an example of that, where we agreed to work toward that, and maybe that's not something that you all actually feel like you want to commit to doing, but just that there's a question for me about sort of like generally accountability. How do we hold this body, you all, and the next town manager perhaps accountable to this work and these commitments that Peter's held really well. And so many of us appreciate the way that Peter has held this work. So one of the ideas that some folks that I know have floated around this transition to the next town manager is speaks to what Jessica said about wanting some sort of like body or some sort of process around that transition and carrying the work over that transition. And one of the ideas that folks have is just a slight formalization of the group of community partners that Peter's already working with. The people that the recommendations advised speaking to about a lot of these community challenges are the people who experience them directly. People who are psychiatrically labeled or psychiatrized or are mentally ill. People who are BIPOC folks who experience racism. People who experience homelessness, or people who use drugs. I wonder if, I wonder what it will look like to, in some way, ensure that those folks still have a seat at the small table with the next town manager. And I both really, really respect Peter's retirement and need to step down. And I also feel so grateful that he's offered himself as a resource for after that formal transition takes place. I want to like honor his actual time, and also perhaps he could be a member of this advisory group as well, is an idea. He holds so much institutional knowledge about how that process went down. And I know he'll be advising the next person anyway, but depending on how the hiring process goes, I think it could be really, really helpful for us out in the community who are invested in this work, who struggle to know what accountability to such a vague and long commitment might look like. It might be helpful to make sure that you all are committing to us to have those same people in the room as the work continues. Because otherwise, I think the vagueness of the commitment can be a detriment to the work instead of what it has been so far, which I think is an asset that's freed you all up to be able to really be flexible and responsive to the actual needs of this community. So those are some ideas just about the future. One other thing I will say is that as a person who listened a lot, I did a lot of listening this fall about people's experiences. I note that the CPCC was reflected on pretty much exclusively as a fairly harmful practice or body, that the CPCC inability to really hold the police accountable, which was maybe its stated function. And instead it was functioning in this other way where it was just bringing people to talk to one another. And there were a lot of like extra judicial processes happening there that were not part of the policy. So I'm wondering if I just want to encourage maybe that's one that we could move on a little quicker. One of the recommendations. There's so many that you've been doing great work on, but from what I heard, it seems like many people who've interfaced with that body would rather nothing exist in the interim than have the CPCC continue for a long time without the next thing being built. I don't think it's hyper utilized. I think they meet incredibly infrequently, but I wonder if disbanding the CPCC might be one more step that we could take a bit more quickly, just for reflection. You all can consider that. I think that's all that I have to share. And again, I'm extending my gratitude for the labor, and I'm sure I'll be seeing you in many future conversations as the work continues toward the horizon of a much more just world. So thanks.
Thank you, Shay. Public info from Select Board. I understand that's Mr. Dimes.
Hello, everybody. Just a good place to sit for standing. Thank you, Peter, for your articulate response. Brattleboro Common Sense began the safe policing disarmament plan in 2017 in negotiations with Chief Fitzgerald. By the time the community safety review team was acting on it, interim chief Mark Carrigan had steered the discussion towards the need for consultations with people with lived experience. That was his objection. We didn't have a way of showing that the research was valid because we didn't have someone with lived experience. So we brought Inspector Graham Donald to speak to you. And that developed a series of fruitful conversations with Peter and Chief. But I think the proposals to just continue the conversation do not fully honor the recommendations of the CSRT, of the Community Safety Review Team. Inspector Donald provided the lived experience to confirm all the assertions of the plan, to show that Brattleboro is a much safer place than Glasgow and other communities in the UK where safe policing is used and where officers generally do not carry firearms. So despite this presentation of a very authoritative figure, the plan, not even the very modest and unambitious pilot plan, are going to be honored quickly. The pilot plan is so modest, just involving an hour or so of each officer's time being without a weapon in a week. That's a very modest proposal, and Brattleboro is a safe place for police. Then I hope that that your negotiations or discussions with Chief Hardy, Peter, were not hindered by a misconception of the Select Board's authority. I think Ian might confirm this, as he has confirmed things that I've said by getting citations. I think it's Section 6, Article 6, Section 4 of the Charter. One of the later duties of the Select Board, I think it's number AA, is to administer the police department, including its personnel and equipment. So the select board can say how the police use guns. But I don't think you'll ever have a disagreement, a substantial disagreement with Chief Hardy. Then I also say Brattleboro Common Sense will continue the work. We were hoping to do this and get this implemented in Brattleboro because we believe it will be a big thing for the status of the town. Because the safe policing project, the partial disarmament of police will be transformative for police public relations. It will transform what policing means in our country. That's the kind of thing we need to do. So we'll continue the work, and we will continue to lobby the town to go for a trial period. Thank you very much. Thank you again.
Thank you, Kurt. Peter?
Thanks, Kurt.
Thank you. I just want to briefly respond, not to the substance of Kurt's remarks, but there's an aspect of his comment and one of the things that we heard from Shay that I think this particular part of the recommendations is ideal for understanding at least my perspective on this. I'm not saying it's the only way to look at it. And that is this question of accountability and fulfillment of the original intention as compared to working on the body of work and finding our way and ultimately getting to a place where some people are very pleased with how things got implemented in exactly the way they might have been envisioned, and other things didn't, and people might be disappointed about that, or might be pleased with the alternative way in which things got done. So I think it's, one thing we've said to each other about this from the beginning of it is, how large and complex and challenging it is, and it's going to take a long, long time. We who are in this meeting tonight will never be finished with it. And so I think that the accountability part, maybe particularly on those areas where we who are responsible for moving the needle inside of town government have some reservations. I think that part of that accountability goes beyond just the degree to which we're able to demonstrate that we're doing something that satisfies the original intent, but where we know that we might not be doing that, or in the fact, in the disarmament part where we know that we're not doing that, to square up to that and be responsible for it and say it publicly. And we've tried to do that on that particular question, both in the original document that we brought forward in March, where we said we're open to learning about it, but we have no intention of moving forward with it unless we learn some things that are revelations to us, basically. And now we've had what I tried to report tonight to the community, some really rich communication with somebody who believes in this, who's actually, giving us professional advice and some nudges towards trying it in certain circumstances, carefully and thoughtfully and on a limited basis. And the conversation is ongoing because at the end of the day, only Chief Hardy can make that decision. It's her responsibility to make sure that the work is conducted in a manner that doesn't actually leave the community and the officers involved, more in harm's way instead of improving, instead of improving the community safety impact of our actions, actually detracting from it. So what we've said out loud on that matter is, we're not moving assertively towards implementation, but we're keeping our minds open to the extent that we're staying in ongoing dialogue with a person who's got vast professional experience in an environment where that model is the model of policing. And we mean that. That's real. And there may come a time when Chief Hardy speaks about, we're going to try this or we're going to try that. But I'm not going to suggest there ought to be a time frame for that, and I'm not going to push Chief Hardy towards that. That's a decision that will get made in the context of all the rest of this and the ongoing engagement of the police department in the variety of ways that have nothing to do with armament or disarmament, but everything to do with the role of the police in the community and the expectations for what police can do and should do versus what others might be better suited to do. You know, that work is already underway and, you know, gaining some momentum in various different ways. But on the parts of this that people might feel like we ought to have more fully embraced, what we're trying to do to be accountable in those areas is be really candid about what we're not moving forward with at this time.
Thank you, Peter. Okay, Aine Thompson, please. Hi, Aine, how are you?
Hi, good, thanks. I wasn't able to change my name, but I'm just speaking as a community member tonight, so apologies for my work name. Yeah, I'm so heartened by this conversation and really appreciating being invited to listen to these updates. Thank you so much. I was commenting more on the larger community support aspect of the creating alternatives to carceral systems, including the police, but also mental health incarceration. And I've heard repeatedly that these structures, you know, and again, I just want to say alternatives to police would be like crisis response team kind of things and pure respite spaces instead of mental health incarceration, which is something that we've talked a lot about in the town. And I've really appreciated Peter Elwell's commitment to that they don't exist in the ways that we need them to shift resources to them. And, you know, as Ian said, I appreciate you asking about the budget and Daniel mentioning that there are nonprofits in the area and others working on these issues. Funding. I think I froze when I said that, so I said it 3 times, is a big deal. And if we're funding the carceral systems, that's what we have. And we don't have data and we don't have the structures built out that we need to build out unless we can invest in them. So I'm just here to say that that's important. I love that you all are thinking about that and that's something that will happen more with budget season. I also, I've personally seen Peter's commitment to accountability. So I really appreciate you speaking to that, and also this board, having watched this process for a really long time. And to continue that work, I also really, for the first time, heard this idea that Shay made about creating a body so we don't lose this institutional knowledge. And also, as an aside, would support Peter potentially wanting to serve on this body if that were an interest. Just throwing that out there as a community member. And I think it's also important for another reason, and that's we really, I think a lot of community members, including myself, feel strongly that leaving the creation or oversight of these alternatives to the leaders of systems that Community Safety Review found overwhelmingly that many community members were not trusting and experienced harm by, it is not the way to really go forward to genuinely implement these recommendations. So I would hope that there was still community involvement with the same types of folks that we've identified really need to be heard from. And I feel like we really did this process in that way. So anyway, thank you so much for hearing from me, and I hope you all have a great night.
Thank you. Alex, would you like to speak to us?
Hi, everybody. Thank you so much. Alex Fisher, they, them, District 2 rep, and just a raging giant fan of all this work. Of course, wanting to start off by just thanking, you know, appreciating and acknowledging everyone that has allowed us to be in this moment tonight, and taking a slight pause of acknowledging not just the people in this room, but the centuries, the millennia of communities, of movements, of individuals that have been doing the work of creating community safety, that have been doing the work of creating community for folks that have, you know, lost either their life or their ability to be connected to those they love because of carceral systems, and to really acknowledge that what we are doing here tonight is both hugely monumental and also a small ripple in the history and the forward movement of what we're moving towards. And I say that because there's just so much to build off of. There's so many people who are bringing forth such incredible ideas and have been practicing and experimenting and resisting and creating, you know, for so long. And I want to remind us that we here in Brattleboro, although we are the one and only, we are also not the one and only when it comes to a lot of this work. And so to remember that like our resources go beyond this town, they go beyond this community, and that as much as we are doing new things, we are also not doing anything new. And to really take that as like a humble moment that there's a lot to kind of learn from and expand elsewhere. Okay, I'm going to say two things that I would, small critiques, and then a lot of things that I'm so excited about. So the two things that I'm slightly less than jazzed about are the CPCC issue. I would fully support disbanding the CPCC immediately. I formerly was on the CPCC, the community, I can't even remember what, community policing.
Communications Committee.
Thank you. Having been a previous member and hearing, you know, bits and pieces from Shay in the report, just fully supporting disbanding that immediately. It is causing more harm than good. Why not? And the other piece that I just want to support is, or like support a critique of, is the idea of the crisis intervention team as a holding place for moving towards decoupling the police from mental health specifically, but other types of community involvement or community issues, and really acknowledging that one piece of it for me is that there would actually be an increase of police interaction from folks specifically that are EMTs or mental health professionals or people that would be those other folks on call. And so what that would mean is the people responding to situations would both have to feel comfortable and safe around the police to be riding in a car with them, would increase their own relationship or sort of, what's the word? Engagement with the police in their day-to-day. And so when we think about who we want responding to incidents in our community, if it's going to be community members, we also want those community members to be invested in non-carceral systems, to be invested in moving forward, but also to be people that might feel uncomfortable or unsafe being around the police because of identity or experience or institutional power. So really naming that the CIT model requires professionals that feel comfortable with a policing system. So just naming that for me, I personally am like, let's just go for the gold. Like if we're gonna decouple, let's take a little bit longer and just do it right. Really, really holding on to what Shay has said in the past around what is that horizon? And let's make sure we're not creating steps that take us away from the horizon, but making sure we're creating steps taking us towards that. So I understand that that's a model that folks are using around the country, and I'm just not in this moment, and I will happily be, you know, swayed. I'm not in this moment sure that it's taking us to where we want to go, but more is possibly a faster holding ground. Okay, and the three things that I'll just say I'm so excited about, besides like basically everything, because I like this is huge, you know, and I just want to keep that tone of celebration and excitement that a year ago we were, you know, engaging in really intense discussion over whether this was even a priority for our town. And so this is huge and monumental and exciting. And the fact that it's moving forward is just fantastic. I can't wait till we get to have a celebration party somewhere, somehow. So yay for the fair and impartial policing, just being done, moving forward, checking that off, amazing. Yay for the idea of the advisory board. Love it. I think it's great. It is a practice among any sort of community project to make sure there are folks that are there for oversight and for continuity, really, and also institutionalizing those relationships, which again, I think what has been named is some of those relationships that Peter specifically is engaging in have traditionally not been involved in this sort of work. And so making sure that involvement moves forward. And then lastly, just everything Daniel got excited about and shared about the select board decisions and policy stuff coming up around community-based de-escalation teams and community-based restorative justice, investing in community spaces. All of that is just really exciting to hear that that is going to be what's coming out of this to really build alternatives. I got very chatty because I'm very, very excited and appreciate so many things, and I will be done now.
Thank you, Alex. Bob Osser? Hello, Bob.
I'm there, but I'm going to probably stop the video because I have this tendency to get an error message after it already interrupts me. So I'll see if this works. There's so much good. I can't, mention it all. I wanted to zero in on the one paragraph on page 11 in the backup materials. And I am so glad that Peter highlighted that in his presentation about the leadership of individuals and organizations in the community. And that whole notion that community capacity needs to be created and nourished in order to move forward. I just want to bookmark that some way. And thank you for mentioning that. Thank you for the example about the Women's Freedom Center. And would like to very much stay in the loop about how that piece of it moves forward. And the caveat on that is that we really need to develop the capacity, because there were lessons learned, or maybe there should have been lessons learned from deinstitutionalization in the past, where clearly bad institutions were removed with a promise that new things would be developed. And those new things didn't develop. So there was really a letdown because of that. And we're facing some of the results of that today. So the importance of creating and nourishing that system as part of this process is so important. Thank you for all that work, but thank you particularly for highlighting that. Thank you.
Thank you, Bob. Public input from select board room. That would be Kurt, I'm assuming.
Thank you.
Make it quick, Kurt, because this is your second shot.
Oh, yeah, well, okay, yeah. Peter, your general strategy of taking the whole implementation table at once, I get that. And there is some allowance for variation from that, as you have varied a little bit, addressing some projects differently from others. So I would say, I hope it's fine if we break up the safe policing project a little bit. The CSRT, the Community Safety Review Team, independently, separately endorsed 3 things: the whole plan, the pilot plan. No, they didn't endorse the pilot plan. They endorsed the proposal to have the police not wear their weapons at public meetings. So since that is such a little tiny thing, I think we could maybe ask the chief about implementing that policy, not aggressively, but soon. I hope you'd be with me on that. Thank you.
Okay, Kurt, I think Peter has already discussed that. So let's move to Gary Stroud.
How you doing, everybody? Can you hear me?
Yes, we
Gary
can.
Stroud, District 2 representative, boy, I tell you, back on Zoom. Good to see everybody again. I guess this is pretty much an addition to what everybody is in pretty much on the same accord with and moving forward. into the uncharted waters and into better situations for people and for the town. In regards to CPCC, I'm the vice chair on that. I myself personally think it's time to move things to the next level. How they say, move the ramp up, and looking to take things to a point where it was served its purpose at a time when it was needed. And now with this new generation, it's time to either, if you can't revamp, if you can't remodel, it's time to renew. And that's my saying on that. And I understand what a lot of people are saying about even being in it, because you're limited to a lot of things. And I think now is take things to that point where we need to start taking action and not just speaking and words and stuff, what we say we are going to do, and start doing it and applying it to a lot of the situations that are going on, not just in this town, but around the world. And I appreciate their feedback, their input, and what CSRT did, what Peter did, what the select board did, and everybody's doing. And if they do decide, and that does happen, they create a new board or panel or advisory committee, I would be looking forward to jumping on that bandwagon and moving us into that next generation, and then passing the torch. And I'm getting too old, a lot of committees. But I appreciate you guys taking this time. And Peter, I'll see you at the fishing hole at Hannaford's. Have a good one, Pete. See you soon. Take care.
All right. Well, I think we've heard interesting things from the public and our fellow select board members, and we're all deeply engaged in listening. I don't think, unless the select board has other comments to make, I think we should just reiterate where we are on next steps. And I think that there's a lot to absorb about what Peter said tonight, what Peter's written tonight, what the public has said tonight. And so, there is no specific action for the select board to take, and that's kind of a given. But, we will be going forward with not only our December meeting, but all the budget talks, which are also reflective of policy that would be going forward this fall. And I think we can all be heartened by the fact that the police chief search was so fruitful and included a very strong commitment to this work that Chief Hardy will continue. And that same is an example for the town manager search that's currently being conducted. So I think that people can be heartened to know that we are looking for a like-minded person to continue this work. Does anyone have any final comments they'd like to make? Let me begin with Peter. Do you have any wrap-up comments?
No, thank you. I appreciated the input from the community. I think there's a lot there for us to work on in
Yes.
budget and outside of budget over these next few months.
Very
Thank you.
good. All right. Select board members, are we content? All right. Does anyone have a motion to make? Yes, Jessica.
No, I would just like to say something before we adjourn.
Very good.
I'm just really inspired by some of the ideas that came up in this conversation. I'm interested in the select board having a conversation about the CPCC. I am interested in also talking about how we might support institutionalizing and funding the continued work on this project and the relationships that are built around it. And we didn't get a chance to hear from Chief Hardy tonight, though she is here. And I think that if she would like to respond or say anything or introduce herself to folks that may not have met her yet, I think it would be nice to give her the opportunity to do that.
Very good. Chief Hardy is interrogated. Do you wish to respond?
Sure.
I am.
There you are. Hi, Norma.
I
Good
am.
evening.
Hello. Hello. I will just respond by saying that, I just applaud the select board and Peter. We've been working very hard. My first month has been lots of meetings and lots of discussions. And I applaud the community for this body of work. I think that we can do a lot of things with it to make the community of Brattleboro better. And, anyone who has not met me yet, I have lots of meetings coming up with individuals that have actually called me and set up their own meetings. I am open to speaking with the community, and I will be doing at least one more chat with the chief before the weather changes too much and I won't be able to do them outside. So I will have that coming up. And also, if someone wants to have a discussion with me, I'm more than willing to sit down and have a discussion with you. Just contact me, and my calendar allows, then I will speak with you.
Excellent. Thank you, Norma.
Thank you.
All right.
Can I?
Yes, Tim.
One little, just because, well, Jessica. No, I wanted to just acknowledge a couple of voices about addressing the CPCC a little earlier. I think I want to just say that I hear those concerns. I think maybe we could think about, making that discussion get kicked off in the December meeting a little more intentionally, rather than just another check-in. We could say to ourselves, we definitely want to start the discussions about the CPCC even before a new town manager is in. Just a suggestion. The one thing I wanted to say about it is that I really hate the word disband, because I would like to see it a new name, a new mission. We really need to think about what is the role of such a committee. But disband to me sends a signal of all of these good people, and we heard from one of them, there's good people serving on all our town committees. I don't want to just say, we don't need you. The energy that is being volunteered for such a project just needs to be channeled. And so I'm all in favor of a complete revamp and a complete rethink of what that committee should and can do. And I just wanted to see if I can nudge us away from disband. There's something about it, I just don't like the term. And just to reiterate, gosh, I'm not sure you could pick a more important task that's before the 5 select board members that you see before you right now than picking a replacement for Peter Elwell. So if we don't return emails immediately, guess what we're doing? We're really diving in starting tomorrow at some really important decisions. So that's the next big thing on our agenda, and it's going to affect our town for years to come. So this was an exciting evening. Thank you.
Thank you, Tim. Shay, you got 1 minute.
He's come to argue with my
Hi.
on
Hi,
disband.
Shay.
Disband is just in the recommendations. That's what I want to say, that's what we heard from folks we were listening to, and that's in the recommendations. I'm less concerned with semantics than action, and the action that's needed, including as supported by the most dedicated CPCC member ever, Gary Stroud, is to stop that body, that institutionalized body, not those people, from functioning as itself, because it's not working, and to do something else. And whether that's, however that transition needs to happen, the semantics don't matter. But that body just getting a new mission with the same people, like just keeping, I'm worried about like it staying, because that's not the recommendation we heard from the community. The community said this body is causing harm. It should not exist the way it exists now. We need a new thing. And newness is not an indictment of any of the people there. I think it's a systemic critique. It's not an individual critique of any members. The members, many members talk to us and they're all great. The body needs a new form, and and a new mission, like you said. So I don't care about the word disband, but I care about the recommendations because that's what we heard from the community. Thank you. I'm done.
Thank you. Gary, you also get 1 minute rebuttals. We're having 1 minute rebuttals tonight.
I started this. Sorry.
I think it's not the word disband. I think the word renew I used, because basically some things you have to go back and renew, just like a car or yourself when you go to the doctor or something like that. And you have to go back and look at whatever the original mission statement was and bring it up to date and up to speed to the current times. Because perhaps those mission statements from back then worked back then, but don't apply now. So that's why I said you have to really look at a side-by-side comparison to see what worked then may not work now. So maybe we really need to do is not revamp, not the committee or the people, but the structure and how it's been built for that time. It worked at that time, but it may not work now. And I think that's the issue that the people are more worried about, because if you look at the issue of the mission statement and what capabilities that they're allowed to do, those are limitations. And once you remove those limitations and barriers and build upon that, then you can take things to that next level that you need to do. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Gary. Thank you for that nuanced discussion. Are there any more select board members who would like to comment before we adjourn? Yes, Ian.
Just one very quick comment. I just wanted to piggyback off of Tim on the town manager search. I don't know, I've actually been reflecting on it a lot, maybe because we have a lot of work to do on it very soon. I'm just very grateful for this work from the community safety review and also from the select board and also from the town manager and staff. It's very helpful, I think, for the board as we move towards the town manager search in focusing us and using this material and all of this in our decision making there. And I'm really committed to that. And I'm, I just think it's a little daunting, that next project that we have. But I find that this material and actually this meeting to be very helpful as we move into that next big thing. So.
Great. And just to make everyone aware, so tomorrow night, there's another special meeting, which is an executive session where the select board will begin the process of reviewing applicants for the town manager position. And so that work that will commence this starting tomorrow. And all the work that we're doing on this topic and others is important work that we see ahead of us for the fall. And I thank the public for paying attention, and of course, our select board members for their hard work. And with that, I would appreciate a motion. Yes, Tim.
I would move to adjourn.
Thank you, Tim. Tim has moved to adjourn. All select board members in favor, please raise your hand and say aye.
Aye.
Aye. All right, thank you all. I thank you all for your attendance on Zoom, and I thank the interpreters and the BCTV and all the public, and most importantly, Peter, for all his hard work. Thank you. Good night.